Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of On the Gridiron. I am your host, Matthew Heiserman, and I'm proud to announce that the NFL season is just 18 days away as of recording this video. I know that we're all excited for another great season of football. This is the first ever episode of my new podcast. We have a lot of stuff to break down in this episode. JJ McCarthy's out for the season. Haason Reddick is still holding out and much more. So let's get right into it with JJ McCarthy. And it was reported over the weekend last week that he felt some soreness. Monday night, he went in and he took an MRI and he tore a meniscus in his right knee, I believe it was, and he's going to need surgery. He will be out for the entire season, which definitely hurts for the Vikings. But I wanted to cover some different things, what this means for Sam Darnold. They signed Matt Corral, what it looks like for Justin Jefferson in fantasy this season. There's a lot of different things happening in the Vikings organization now that happened. So, first of all, Sam Darnold will start the season, and his career stats, I was looking at these earlier, they haven't been great. His completion percentage in his career is under 60, which is not something to be happy with. His record's 21-35, and he has 63 touchdowns to 56 interceptions. Now, when he was playing for the Jets in that 2020 season, as well as the 2021 season, he actually had more interceptions than touchdowns both of those years. And during those seasons, he played a total of 12 games. So it wasn't necessarily a small sample size. And this will, in theory, be the most he's played since that 2021 season. In 2022, he played 6 games for the Panthers. And then last year, he played 10 games for the 49ers, but he only started one of those games and played very limited amount. So that's not necessarily counting towards a full season with a good sample size. And they signed just the other day Matt Corral. And I think that this is a good signing for them because if you ask me, the Matt Corral signing just brings extra flexibility to the table because you don't want to be stuck with one quarterback. If Sam Darnold is struggling, they can use Matt Corral. If Matt Corral's not playing good, they can go back to Sam Darnold. They can kind of move back and forth. So this way, it's not, oh, Sam Darnold's struggling, but we don't have anyone else to go to, which is the situation they would have been without Matt Corral, or you go into your third string, your fourth strings, and you really don't want to do that. So I think it's a good signing, and hopefully he's able to help if they need it, which I'm not sure if they will, but there's a chance that they're going to need someone other than Sam Darnold if Darnold really does struggle. Now, another thing I want to talk about is Justin Jefferson in fantasy this season, what it could look like for him. Now, I have some stats. Jefferson last season, of course, Kirk Cousins was injured for part of the season, right? So when Jefferson played with Kirk Cousins, he averaged 136 yards and he got 3 total touchdowns. And that sample size was 4 games. He only played 4 games with Kirk Cousins. So not necessarily the most, but he still had some. And then after that, he played 5 games with Nick Mullins. And this is when Kirk Cousins was out for the season. And Jefferson in those 5 games averaged 101 yards and he got 2 total touchdowns, which is not bad whatsoever, not quite as good as when he had Kirk Cousins. So basically, the point I'm trying to get across is that no matter who the quarterback is for Jefferson, he's still going to get targets and he's still going to have a good season in my mind. With those games he had with Nick Mullins, if he played the entire season all with Nick Mullins and averaged those stats that he had in those 5 games, he would have been on pace to get over 1,700 receiving yards during the season and over 6 touchdowns, which is extremely good. Now, another thing is just the overall look for the Vikings heading into this season. And honestly, I think it's going to be a really big struggle bus for them because this is really unfortunate, but their fourth round pick, Kyrie Jackson, did pass away earlier this offseason. And I believe it was a car accident. Jordan Addison got taken out of the game, or out of, I believe it was practice training camp on a cart with a sudden leg ankle injury. And it seems as though that's not too serious. It's not necessarily a major injury, but you still don't want to see that happen. So overall, it's not looking great for the Vikings. They've really been struggling recently. They did sign Stephon Gilmore earlier today, which is not necessarily the area I thought he was going to go to. I knew he was going to get signed eventually, but I didn't expect it to be the Vikings. Overall, he's old. He's, I think, around 34, but he still has a lot left in the tank. He's still a good cornerback. So I think that will be a signing to help the defense. They did lose Danielle Hunter, which isn't going to help them, especially on defense, because Hunter is a very underrated piece, definitely a star in their defense when he was there. So it's interesting to see how they're going to look. And honestly, I think that they're going to be the worst team in the NFC North this year, which is crazy. They were the best team, I believe. It was 2 years ago when they made the playoffs, lost to the Giants in the first round. And I mean, I think that the Lions are going to be number one in that division. And I think that the Lions and the 49ers are kind of equal for the leaders in the entire NFC. I think they both have a good shot of making the Super Bowl this season. And then at number two in that division, I'm going to have to go with the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love just got signed to a massive contract, biggest in NFL history. And we'll see how that pans out. But I think they just have a lot of potential. They made the playoffs last year, beat the Cowboys, which is not a surprise because when do the Cowboys do good in the playoffs? But I think that they do just have loads of potential overall, and it's going to be a pretty good season for them. I'm excited to see how everything works out there. And then number three, this is where it becomes a little closer, maybe between the Vikings and the Bears, but I still have the Bears. Caleb Williams, of course, was taken with the first overall pick, and he's put in a perfect position. They got Keenan Allen. They already had DJ Moore. Cole Kmet's a pretty good tight end, definitely underrated. They drafted Rome Odunze, and he should be a good weapon for Caleb to have for years to come. They got DeAndre Swift from the Eagles. So they have a lot of weapons. And this is a situation where the Bears could be really good on paper and not necessarily good in game when it matters. But we did see Caleb have some good games in preseason. He had that one really nice throw against the Bills in week one. And then I believe it was yesterday, he had a nice rushing touchdown. He passed to Rome Odunze for a 40-plus yard play. So there's definitely a lot of potential there. And then at number five, at the number four spot in that division, that's where I have the Vikings, a big drop off from where they were 2 years ago. But it's really just been downhill for them. And I don't think it's a bad team. I just think they need a better quarterback. And I think that overall, they're missing some pieces in some areas that could really hurt them. And in terms of fantasy, I talked about how good Jefferson still could be with a backup. Who do I have above him? I think CD Lamb is above him. They're still figuring out that situation, trying to get him a contract, but I expect him to be playing by the start of the season, probably for the Cowboys. I'd be surprised if it's not for the Cowboys, but I think they're going to work out that contract. I think he's going to be playing for them. And then Jamar Chase, I have over Justin Jefferson. I think Chase, hopefully, if Chase can stay fully healthy and if Burrow can stay fully healthy, that connection is going to be there. It's going to be really good. Tyreek Hill is obviously, in my opinion, above Jefferson with how consistent he's been. He was so awesome last year, ranked number one out of all NFL players in the top 100 list. So I think that those three players, CD Lamb, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, are definitely most likely going to be better than him. And then there's one guy I'm kind of in between on, and that's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mentioned how good the Lions are going to be earlier, but Amon-Ra St. Brown, really consistent, but I still think it's going to be close because, I mentioned that 1,700 yards he would have gotten with a full season with Nick Mullins, and it's like, are we sure Amon-Ra can do that? I know he can, but I don't know if he's going to get the opportunity to. He has a lot of other good players on his team. He has Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Sam Laporta had a breakout season last year. So we'll see what that looks like. And then some players you see shortly after him, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson. They're not necessarily better than Jefferson, but they could still have really good years. Maybe Puka Nacua. I want to see how he's able to play after having a great rookie season, if he's able to keep that up and still perform well in his second year, or if we just got a little lucky in that rookie season. We'll see how it looks for him there. Now, moving on, I want to talk a little bit about Haason Reddick and this holdout situation. He held out 21 days of training camp and accumulated over $1 million in fines for doing so. And it was Monday, August 12th, which was 6 days ago, when Reddick requested a trade. And then later that day, the Jets GM Joe Douglas came out with a statement basically saying, we're not looking to trade Reddick. He's expected to play with our guys. He's expected to be a good teammate. And that just kind of put a lot more pressure on the situation. And keep in mind, Reddick turns 30 in about 1 month, so he is aging a bit, but he's still extremely talented. He's never played less than 16 games in a season. He is very healthy most of the time, and he's gotten 11 or more sacks in the past 4 years, which is fourth in the NFL during that span. And another thing that really makes this situation a lot weirder in a way is the fact that he was acquired from the Jets just 4 months ago from the Eagles. It was in a trade. Now, it seems as though the Jets tried to offer Reddick a contract before they traded for him. He turned down that contract, and then they still traded for him after that. So that makes you wonder, are the Jets to blame in this situation for still getting Reddick, even though they knew he was most likely going to hold out? It's kind of both Reddick's fault, but it's also the Jets' fault. I think they're both to blame in this situation, and we're not necessarily sure what the future holds or whether he's going to be holding out to start the season, because as I mentioned, they're not looking to trade him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to hold out during the season. I don't know if he's holding out all 17 games or maybe it's just a few weeks, but the Jets also said they would like to revisit this midway through the season, maybe once the season ends. So that will definitely be interesting when that happens. But another question that you have to think about, does any team really want Haason Reddick? Because if you get Haason Reddick and you're a team other than the Jets, you're still going to have to pay him, right? You're still going to have to pay him. And depending on how much he wants, maybe it's in that $30 million range. Is that too much to pay a guy who I mentioned is about to turn 30 years old in a month? It might be. But another thing to look at here is how Will McDonald has been playing. He's been getting good reps at that position. He's been playing really well, making a name for himself. And I think he could potentially do great this season if Reddick does hold out during the actual regular season, because then he's kind of just opening the door for McDonald to have a breakout year. And that is something that I look forward to seeing what happens there. So that's kind of my opinion on the Reddick situation, a little bit quicker there, but it's just a lot of uncertainties, and we haven't heard anything since he requested a trade, and that statement was said from Joe Douglas back on Monday. So we'll see if there's any more news in the days or weeks to come, or if anything else gets said before the start to the NFL season. Now I want to go into some rapid fire topics before we end off this first episode. Daniel Jones is still on that 4-year, $160 million contract, and it's looking concerning because he threw two interceptions in his preseason game against the Texans. One was a pick six to Jalen Petrie, and the other one was to Derek Stingley. And there's just a lot of questions here surrounding Daniel Jones. Obviously, he's not good. Okay, he played 6 games last year, then he got injured and didn't play for the rest of the season. In those 6 games, though, he had a 1-5 record, which is not good whatsoever. He threw 2 touchdowns compared to 6 interceptions, which is absolutely awful. And the Giants paid him like a superstar back when he got his contract, and it's really just not looked good for them since. What does this mean for Malik Nabers and the rest of the team? Well, Malik Nabers, I wrote an article about him on Substack if you want to check that out. But with him, I think there's a situation where the Giants may have to go to a guy like Drew Lock off the bench, maybe Tommy DeVito, who got some playing time last year when Jones went down with the injury. But no matter what, I think Nabers is going to be able to get a lot of targets. Of course, Saquon no longer plays for the Giants now. He's moved on to the Eagles. And I mean, the competition's not necessarily the best in New York for a guy like Nabers. Jalen Hyatt is still there. Wan'Dale Robinson is there. And they picked up Allen Robinson. They have Darius Slayton, who's looking to be the number 2 behind Nabers. Now, Nabers has made some incredible plays during training camp and practices that I've seen. He's had some great highlights, but I don't know necessarily what that's going to translate to in a game when Daniel Jones is being put up against really good defenses. He might struggle even more than he is struggling now because, of course, they don't want to injure Daniel Jones during preseason or anything. And I'm not saying that the defense is taking it easy, but it's going to be a lot more difficult during the regular season. So we'll see how that affects what Malik Nabers is able to do. But no matter what, as I was saying, Nabers is going to get targets. He's going to get receptions because the competition is not there. So while he might be playing with a struggling quarterback, or in this situation, quarterbacks, I think he's still going to have a productive season. I think he could definitely get 1,000 yards. I think he'll be a red zone threat, at least for whenever the Giants get into the red zone this year, which probably won't be that many times. But I am excited to see how Nabers is able to do. He's definitely my second favorite rookie receiver going into this season, especially in fantasy football, behind Marvin Harrison Jr. And then I think after Nabers, you have Brian Thomas Jr. Then you get into that Xavier Worthy, Rome Odunze, Ladd McConkey conversation. But lastly, before we wrap things up for the first episode, I want to talk about Jahan Dotson. And earlier, just a few days ago, Dan Quinn stated, the Commanders coach, he stated, he basically said, we're still looking for that number 2 wide receiver. No one has necessarily proven that they are in that number 2 wide receiver spot. And of course, Terry McLaurin is going to be the number 1. And when Dan Quinn said that, he mentioned how Zacchaeus has played good during preseason, how he's looked good during training camp. So maybe expect him to be in that category. Now, obviously, the first thing you think of is, Jahan Dotson. Why isn't Jahan Dotson in this category? And that's a valid question. Jahan Dotson has been the number 2 for the Commanders for the past few years. And I think it all comes down to this. The fact that Dan Quinn, this is, of course, his first year for the Commanders as their coach. And with any new coach, a player has to prove himself. Jahan has played good in the past with Ron Rivera, but Dan Quinn hasn't necessarily seen that from him yet. So he's just going to have to prove himself. Do I think that Dotson will be the number 2 receiver come when the season starts? Yes, I do. But right now, Zacchaeus is kind of putting a little pressure on him. I think Diame Brown has played really good. I'm excited to see how he's able to do during the regular season. So, yeah, I mean, Jahan might be the number 2 receiver on this team, and I think he is. But no matter what, Dan Quinn has to see that, it hasn't been proved yet. So we'll see that throughout the rest of the season. And hopefully we'll see Jahan really step up as that number two. Although sticking with the Commanders, Jaden Daniels has looked pretty good so far. He's played consistent in preseason. He had that one rushing touchdown in the first game. He had that bomb to Diame Brown as his first completion in preseason. And then just yesterday against the Dolphins, I believe he was something like 10 for 12 and some good passing stats, no touchdowns. The Commanders' offense was very unproductive in yesterday's preseason game, but I'm excited to see what Jaden can do. I think he's one of the candidates for Offensive Rookie of the Year, obviously, and so far he's been very impressive. I think he's NFL ready, and I think he'll be a great QB1 to start the season for the Commanders, and I think of course, it's too soon to say, oh, is he going to have a great career or not? You can't tell, but I know that he's going to have a great season, and I know that he's going to give hope to Commanders fans. I'm a Commanders fan, and he's definitely giving me a lot of hope. I'm not expecting us to have a great season. I know we're probably not going to win any more than 7, 8 games, but that's not what matters. What matters is we see progress from the ownership again. We see Jaden Daniels having a good season, and we just see overall, hope from this squad that has really struggled in the past. And hopefully we can start winning in the future, but winning isn't necessarily the biggest concern for the Commanders this season. But with that being said, we are going to wrap up this episode. If you made it to this point, I can't thank you enough for listening. Of course, it was the first ever episode of On the Gridiron. I appreciate all support. If you have any feedback, let me know. I'd like to work on things. Of course, first ever episode, so I'm still getting used to it. I'm going to try and get better. And just some quick things before I end it. I don't have a constant schedule of when I'm posting yet, so it's not necessarily I'm posting this day every single week. I'll post episodes when I'm able to, when I have the time to, but I look forward to making a lot of episodes. And hopefully I'm just able to grow. The channel growth has been amazing recently. We just passed 850 subscribers as of recording this. So that's always amazing. I really appreciate all the support that we've gotten. But with that being said, that wraps up the first ever episode of On the Gridiron. I am your host, Matthew Heiserman, and I'll see you next time.